This is one of the little trails that they walk down. It's very narrow, and I'm looking for hoof prints or droppings, and I really don't see, there's sort of a hoof print. Don't see much evidence of them being here. Oh, here we go. Here's one dropping. So I guess it is kind of normal, but you barely ever hear them, and it's very rare for us to see them. They're very elusive, these cattle. All right, crew and YouTube, Sister Kate here. I have been a little unavailable lately. You can hear my voice. I've been sick. We're pretty sure it's nothing serious, but it affects how I sound, and I've been doing a lot of rest, whatever is affecting me. I have some fatigue with it, so I've kind of been out of the loop, but there's two things happening today that just cannot be ignored, at least in my world, because they're so unusual. The first one I'm talking about right now is the feral cattle. Now, I'm sure if you're on my husband's Patreon, he's probably mentioned them, that somewhere out there in the woods, and it's not just on our property, there's a lot of land around us, and not all of it is fenced, and we have had several sightings of wild cattle, up to 7 at a time, mostly black Angus, and they've been in different parts of our property, but they've also been in other locations. And so Pastor and I really started to pay attention in the last week or two because they have been coming back. And so what I did the other night was right down in that area, I put a bucket of grain and I called to the cattle because I had come around a corner, and there's a little video of that. There's a little video of that. And 3 of them were standing right there, and they saw me, but they didn't run away. They just kind of moved away from me and kind of meandered through our village. And so I thought, all right, they're not completely afraid of me. So I went down, got a bucket of grain, shook it, made some noises with it, called to them, here cow, and then put it down and then left. And so the next morning when I came up, or afternoon, the bucket had been knocked over and all the grain had been eaten. And yes, it could have been a deer, could have been a squirrel, but I was pretty sure it was probably the cattle because all of it was gone. And so the next day, we saw them again in another part of our property off to my right here. And they were just standing in this open space eating at nighttime. And Pastor and I kind of came up and approached them a bit, and they moved away from us and moved on to some other property. And so we left, but I left the bucket again. So then last night, we were up here with a few other people, and we had been talking, and when we came out of the longhouse, it was dark, and the cattle were right out in that area that I just showed you. And I think they were looking for the bucket of grain. And then somebody came down in their truck, a neighbor of ours that we know who's Hmong, and he said, those are my cattle, and yes, they've been wandering around. And so my husband said, of course, come try to get your cattle. So they came through the woods and brought a bucket with them. And he said that they talked to the cattle in Hmong, and the cattle responded. They started to follow them through the woods, following the bucket, and then wandered off in between where we are and where they are, back into the woods. So truly, these cattle are kind of feral. They're kind of wary of people. We don't often see them in broad daylight. The 2 times I saw them was dusk and after dusk. I've also seen signs of them. I've seen some droppings, but not many. And they're not like most cattle, like they're more green than anything. And some hoof prints. I've seen some hoof prints. I included a picture of a little bit of a hoof print trail that I noticed the other day when I was pulling up weeds. It's in a wet ditch area on our property, a drainage area. And while I was down there property, a drainage area. And while I was down there pulling these weeds out, I noticed, oh wait, here's a big hole, here's a big hole. And then I just talked to another person on the property, and there are tracks in front of his place heading off in another direction. So they are here. We are going to try to do the biblically correct thing with your neighbor's cattle. You try to help him get them back. So that is what we're going to do. But since I've never really kept cattle and don't really know that much about them, I'm also kind of half curious. Like, if I keep putting a bucket up here, will they keep coming here? And if they do, will I be able to interact with them in some positive way to help the neighbors get them back where they belong? And so that to me is pretty interesting. This never happened to us before. And I'm more interested in the mindset of these cattle, because I'm sure they've been in the fence before. I'm sure they know what a bucket and the grain is. They obviously don't understand English because that's not what they hear all the time. And so to me, it's just like a whole nother experimental situation to kind of experiment with, but also hopefully come out with a good solution. So that's number one. And then I'll do a video on the second thing also. Yeah, just briefly, there is a podcast live stream this afternoon. There's going to be a practice at 2:30, and then there'll be the real thing at 3 with Heart of a Torah Woman. So I'm kind of excited about that. All right, shalom, bless you.